taste of copper lingered in my mouth as I scrubbed the marble floor of the Villanueva estate, my hands raw from the harsh chemicals. October 23rd, 2024. I'd marked the date in my mind because it was exactly 3 months since my father had stopped looking me in the eye. 3 months since the phone calls started coming late at night, since men in expensive suits began appearing at our door, since our housekeeper Maria was let go and I found myself on my knees doing the work myself. Each movement sent a dull ache through my bones, a persistent exhaustion that had been my constant companion for weeks now. I told myself it was just the stress, just the endless hours of trying to keep our crumbling household together, while my father disappeared into his study with bottles of whiskey and mounting debt. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the entrance hall, casting long shadows across the floor I'd just cleaned. I could hear voices from my father's study, low and urgent, punctuated by the sound of heavy footsteps. More visitors, more creditors probably, come to collect what we didn't have. Isadora. My father's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with an edge I'd never heard before. Not anger exactly, but something worse. Resignation. I pushed myself up from the floor, my knees protesting, and wiped my hands on the apron that had become my daily uniform. When I entered the study, I found my father standing behind his desk like a man awaiting execution. And across from him, in the leather chair that had once been my grandfather's, sat a man who made the air in the room feel suddenly thinner. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that suggested he rarely smiled, and eyes the color of espresso that tracked my movement with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. His suit was black and perfectly tailored, the kind of garment that cost more than our household staff's yearly wages used to be. A gold watch caught the light at his wrist, understated but undoubtedly expensive. But it was his presence that truly arrested me. He sat with the casual confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed, one leg crossed over the other, his hands resting calmly on the arms of the chair. This was not a creditor. Creditors were nervous, aggressive, desperate. This man was none of those things. He was something far more dangerous. "Papa?" I kept my voice steady despite the sudden fear crawling up my spine. "Isadora, this is Lorenzo Cavallero." My father's voice shook slightly. "He's come to discuss the matter of my debt." Lorenzo Cavallero. The name triggered a cascade of memories, whispered conversations I'd overheard, warnings from Maria before she'd left. The Cavalleros were not simply wealthy. They were power itself, their influence extending through every shadow of the city. And if the rumors were true, they owned half the judges, most of the police, and all the fear that kept people in line. "Mr. Cavallero." I managed a slight nod, my mind racing. How much did my father owe? And to these people of all people? "Miss Villanueva." His voice was deep, controlled, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent that softened certain consonants. He didn't stand, didn't extend his hand. He simply watched me with those dark, calculating eyes. "Your father has been explaining his situation to me. It's quite complicated." Complicated. The word hung in the air like smoke. "Isadora," my father began, and I heard the break in his voice, the sound of a man about to do something unforgivable. "Mr. Cavallero has been very patient with me, very generous, but the time has come to settle accounts." "How much?" I asked, looking directly at Lorenzo for the first time, forcing myself not to look away from that penetrating gaze. $2 million. Lorenzo said it casually, as if discussing the weather. Plus, interest accumulated over 18 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. 2 million. We didn't have 2,000. The house was already mortgaged to the ceiling. My mother's jewelry had been sold months ago, and the cars, the art, everything of value was long gone. I don't have it. My father's voice was barely a whisper. But I have a proposal, a guarantee. Something cold settled in my stomach. The way Lorenzo's eyes hadn't left my face since I'd entered the room. The way my father couldn't meet my gaze. The terrible logic of our situation clicking into place. No. The word escaped before I could stop it. Isadora, please. My father finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than any anger. It was pleading. It's temporary. Just until I can restructure the business, sell the properties. 6 months, maybe a year. You're offering me as collateral. I stated it flatly, needing to hear the truth spoken aloud. Lorenzo leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Your father owes a debt he cannot pay. In our world, there are consequences for such situations. But I'm a reasonable man. Instead of seizing assets that would barely cover a fraction of what's owed, your father has proposed an alternative arrangement. An arrangement? My voice was hollow. You mean selling me? Not selling. Lorenzo's voice remained calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Think of it as insurance. You would stay at my estate, under my protection, while your father works to pay his debt. Once the debt is satisfied, you would be free to return. And if he can't pay? I challenged, my hands curling into fists at my sides. Lorenzo's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then we would discuss other arrangements. The future he was offering wasn't freedom. It was ownership with prettier words wrapped around it. I looked at my father, this man who had once seemed so strong, so certain. Now he stood broken behind his desk, unable to even defend his own daughter from being bargained away like property. I need to think about this. I heard myself say, though we all knew there was no real choice. Men like Lorenzo Cavallero didn't make offers that could be refused. Of course. Lorenzo stood then, his movements fluid and controlled. He was tall, I realized, at least 6 feet, with the build of someone who stayed in shape not for vanity but for function. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. I'll send a car at 8. And if I refuse? The question was pointless, but I had to ask it. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and bergamot. His eyes held mine, and I saw nothing soft in them, nothing that suggested mercy or compromise. Then I collect my debt in other ways, he said quietly, ways that would be far less pleasant for your father, and for you, ultimately. At least this way, you have my word that you'll be treated with respect, that you'll be safe. Safe from everything except him. I understand. My throat was tight, but I forced the words out. He studied me for another moment, and I saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. Then he nodded once and moved toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back. I'll see you tomorrow evening, Miss Villanueva. Wear something comfortable for the drive, and bring whatever personal items you'll need. My staff will provide everything else. After he left, the room felt larger somehow, as though his presence had been taking up more space than his physical form. My father collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered. Isadora, I'm so sorry. But sorry changed nothing. Tomorrow evening I would get into Lorenzo Cavallero's car and enter a world I'd only heard about in whispers and warnings. A world of power and violence, and men who took what they wanted without asking. I left my father in his study and walked through the house I'd grown up in, seeing it differently now. Every room held memories of a life that was ending. My mother's piano in the music room, untouched since her death 3 years ago. The library where I'd spent countless afternoons lost in books. The garden where I'd dreamed of futures that now seemed impossibly naive. In my bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and paused. I looked tired, I realized. More than tired. exhausted in a way that went bone deep. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my skin had a pallor that no amount of makeup could hide. I'd been attributing it to stress, to the endless work and worry of the past months. But standing there, about to be handed over to a man like Lorenzo Cavallero, I allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding. Something was wrong with me. Had been wrong for weeks now. The exhaustion, the persistent low-grade fever, the bruises that appeared without cause. The symptoms I'd been ignoring because facing them meant facing something worse than debt. Worse than being collateral in a devil's bargain. I touched the swollen lymph node at my neck, the one I'd been pretending wasn't there. Tomorrow, I would become Lorenzo Cavallero's insurance policy, and he would have no idea that the guarantee he'd accepted was already broken in ways he couldn't see. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my bed, in my room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that would end at 8 o'clock the following evening. I thought about running, about disappearing before the car arrived. But where would I go? And what would happen to my father if I did? No, I would keep my father's bargain. I would get into that car and face whatever waited for me in Lorenzo Cavallero's world. But I would do it on my own terms, with my eyes open and my secrets kept close. Because if he was going to own me, even temporarily, he would never own all of me. Some things remained mine alone, including the truth about the illness I could feel spreading through my body like silent fire. The clock on my nightstand ticked toward morning, each second bringing me closer to the moment everything would change. And in the darkness, I made myself a promise. Lorenzo Cavallero might think he was claiming a possession, insurance against a debt. But he was getting something far more complicated than he'd bargained for. He was getting me, and I had no intention of being anyone's guarantee. The car that arrived at precisely 8 o'clock was a black Mercedes S-Class, the kind of vehicle that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. The driver who emerged was a man in his 50s, his expression professionally neutral as he opened the rear door. "Miss Villanueva," he said with a slight nod. "I'm Marco, Mr. Cavallero's driver. May I help with your luggage?" I looked at the single suitcase I'd packed, containing what few possessions I couldn't bear to leave behind. My mother's jewelry box, a few books, clothes that would probably be inadequate for wherever I was going. "I can manage." My father stood on the steps of our house, watching. He'd tried to speak to me several times throughout the day, but I'd avoided him. What was there to say? Sorry didn't change the fact that I was being traded like property to settle his debts. Marco placed my suitcase in the trunk with careful precision, then held the door for me. The interior of the Mercedes smelled of leather and subtle cologne. As we pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I didn't look back. Looking back served no purpose now. The drive took us out of the city, into hills where houses became estates, where walls grew higher and gates more imposing. Marco drove with practiced ease, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror, but saying nothing. The silence was almost companionable. We turned off the main road onto a private drive, passing through gates that opened automatically. The Cavallero estate revealed itself gradually, like a secret being reluctantly shared. The main house was a sprawling structure of stone and glass, modern architecture blended with classical Italian design. Gardens surrounded it, meticulously maintained despite the late October chill. In the fading light, I could see other buildings in the distance, what looked like guest houses or staff quarters, and beyond that, what might have been stables. This wasn't just wealth. This was empire. Marco pulled up to the main entrance where a woman in her 50s waited, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her dress simple but clearly expensive. She smiled as I emerged from the car, a warm expression that seemed genuine. "Miss Villanueva, welcome. I'm Lucia, the estate manager. Mr. Cavallero asked me to show you to your quarters and help you get settled." "Thank you," I managed, thrown slightly by the hospitality. I'd expected something colder, more prison-like, Lucia led me inside, through an entrance hall that took my breath away. A massive chandelier hung from the 3-story ceiling, casting warm light over marble floors and walls adorned with what I suspected were original Renaissance paintings. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister gleaming dark wood that probably cost more than my father's house. The main house has 42 rooms, Lucia explained as we climbed the stairs. Mr. Cavallero's private quarters are in the west wing. You'll be staying in the east wing, which offers more privacy and a beautiful view of the gardens. Privacy. The word was carefully chosen, I realized. Separate from Lorenzo, but still very much under his control. My quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms that was larger than the entire first floor of my family home. A sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a palace, and a bathroom of marble and gold fixtures that seemed almost obscene in its luxury. "I've taken the liberty of having some appropriate clothing brought up," Lucia said, gesturing to a walk-in closet I hadn't noticed. "Mr. Cavallero thought you might need a few things. If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, just let me know, and we'll have it corrected immediately." I opened the closet door to find it filled with clothes, all in my exact size. Dresses, pants, blouses, shoes, everything coordinated, everything expensive, everything chosen by someone who'd clearly studied me before I'd ever arrived. How did he know my size? The question escaped before I could stop it. Lucia's smile was understanding. "Mr. Cavallero is very thorough in all his endeavors. Dinner is at 8:30. I'll return at 8:15 to show you to the dining room, unless you'd prefer to eat in your room tonight." "I'll come down." I wasn't going to hide. After Lucia left, I explored my gilded cage more thoroughly. The windows didn't lock from the inside, I noticed. The door had no key. The message was clear. I could move within my assigned space, but I wasn't truly free. I changed into one of the dresses from the closet, a simple black sheath that fit perfectly because of course it did. In the bathroom mirror, I studied myself. The dress was elegant, appropriate for dining with a man like Lorenzo Cavallero, but it couldn't hide the signs that concerned me more with each passing day. The shadows under my eyes had deepened, and my skin had taken on a transparency that seemed to reveal every vein beneath. I'd researched my symptoms 3 days ago, finally allowing myself to face what I'd been avoiding. Leukemia. The word had stared back at me from the medical websites with clinical certainty. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, most likely, given the rapidity of my symptoms. I needed to see a doctor, needed tests, needed treatment. But how could I tell Lorenzo Cavallero that his insurance policy was defective? That the guarantee he'd accepted might not survive long enough for my father to pay his debt? At 8:15 precisely, Lucia returned and led me through corridors lined with more art, more evidence of wealth accumulated over generations. We descended a different staircase and emerged into a formal dining room where a table set for 2 gleamed with crystal and silver. Lorenzo stood by the windows, looking out at the gardens now dark with night. He'd changed from the black suit into something more casual, but no less expensive. Charcoal slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. When he turned at our entrance, I saw him properly for the first time in good light. He was devastating. Not handsome in a classical sense, but compelling in a way that made it hard to look away. Strong features, that dark hair slightly tousled now, as though he'd been running his hands through it, and those espresso eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. Isadora. My name in his mouth sounded different, almost possessive. "I hope you found your accommodations acceptable." "They're very generous." I kept my voice neutral, professional almost. "Please sit." He gestured to the chair across from his at the head of the table. A man appeared from what must be the kitchen, setting plates before us with practiced efficiency. The meal was expertly prepared, Italian cuisine that smelled divine. Under normal circumstances, I would have been salivating. But my stomach had been unreliable lately, and the thought of eating made me vaguely nauseous. "You're not eating," Lorenzo observed after a few minutes, his own plate already half finished. "I'm not very hungry." I moved food around with my fork, trying to make it look like I was making an effort. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Lucia mentioned you didn't eat lunch either, or breakfast. So I was being watched, reported on. Of course I was." "I'm fine," I said. "Just adjusting." "To being here, or to the situation in general?" He sipped his wine, still watching me with that unnerving intensity. "Both." I set down my fork, giving up the pretense. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Whether I'll answer is another matter." "What exactly do you expect from me?" "My father said this was temporary, that I'm just insurance. But what does that actually mean?" Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "It means you live here, under my protection, until your father's debt is satisfied. You'll be treated as a guest, not a prisoner. You'll have freedom to move about the estate, access to anything you need. In return, I expect your cooperation and your presence." "My presence?" The word felt loaded. "At certain social functions, dinners, events. Your father owes money to a dangerous organization, Isadora. The fact that I've taken you as collateral sends a message that the debt is being taken seriously, that there are stakes beyond money. It's theater, essentially. You play the role of my guest, and everyone understands the underlying truth. That I'm a hostage, that you're under my protection," he corrected, his voice hardening slightly. "There's a difference." And I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was creeping over me again. That bone-deep weariness that had become my constant state. I suppressed a yawn, but not quickly enough. "You're tired." It wasn't a question. "Lucia will show you back to your room. I can find my own way." "No," he said simply. "You can't. The house is too large, and I don't need you wandering into areas that are off-limits." Off-limits, more boundaries, more invisible walls. Lucia appeared as if summoned, and I found myself being escorted back through the labyrinth of corridors to my suite. Once alone, I collapsed onto the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. This was my life now. Beautiful prison, attentive captors, and a secret eating me from the inside that I couldn't share. Because what would Lorenzo Cavallero do if he knew? Would he return me to my father as defective merchandise? Would he demand different terms? Or would he simply let nature take its course, collecting on my father's debt through my death? I pressed my hand to my abdomen, feeling the slight swelling of my lymph nodes. Time was running out. I needed medical attention, needed to face what was happening to my body. But for now, I was trapped in this golden cage, playing a role in a drama I hadn't chosen, for an audience I'd never wanted. And tomorrow, I would wake up and do it all again. The first week at the Cavallero estate established a routine that felt almost normal if I ignored the fundamental wrongness of my situation. I woke each morning to find breakfast waiting in my sitting room, perfectly prepared by staff I rarely saw. I spent my days in the library Lorenzo had indicated I could use, a room of floor-to-ceiling books that would have been paradise under different circumstances. Evenings brought dinner with Lorenzo, formal affairs where we spoke carefully around the truth of what I was to him. He was unfailingly polite, asking about my day, my comfort, my needs. Everything except the question that actually mattered. How did I feel about being his prisoner? It was on the 8th day, November 1st, that everything shifted. I'd woken that morning with a fever I could no longer pretend was nothing. My temperature had been climbing for days, and now I felt like I was burning from the inside out. Every joint ached, every movement required enormous effort. I'd managed to dress and make it to breakfast, but the sight of food made my stomach revolt. Lucia found me in the library an hour later, collapsed in a reading chair, the book I'd been trying to focus on forgotten in my lap. "Miss Villanueva?" Her voice was sharp with concern. "Are you all right?" "Fine." The lie was automatic. Just tired. But Lucia was already pressing her hand to my forehead, her expression growing alarmed. "You're burning up. How long have you been feeling ill?" "It's nothing. Just a cold." "This is not a cold." She was already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling Dr. Romano." "No." I tried to stand, but dizziness washed over me and I sank back down. "Please, I just need to rest. Mr. Cavallero needs to know you're unwell." The words sent panic through me. "Don't tell him. Please." But it was too late. Lucia was already speaking rapidly in Italian, her tone urgent. Within minutes, I heard footsteps approaching, the distinctive measured stride I'd learned to recognize. Lorenzo appeared in the library doorway, his expression shifting from mild concern to something sharper when he saw me. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, crouching beside my chair. "How long has she been like this?" He directed the question to Lucia, but his eyes never left my face. "I found her a few minutes ago." "But look at her, Mr. Cavallero. This isn't sudden. She's been sick for a while." His hand came up to touch my forehead, and I flinched at the contact. But his touch was surprisingly gentle, clinical almost, as he checked my temperature, then my pulse at my wrist. "Your heart is racing." He spoke directly to me now. "And you're far too warm. What other symptoms?" I wanted to lie, to deflect, but the fever was making it hard to think clearly. "Fatigue, loss of appetite, some pain." "Where?" "Joints, bones." I hesitated, then continued. "My neck. There are swollen lymph nodes." Something changed in Lorenzo's expression. The clinical assessment gave way to something colder, more calculating. "Show me." With trembling fingers, I indicated the lumps at the sides of my neck, under my jaw, in my armpits, places where my lymphatic system was staging its failing rebellion against whatever was destroying it from within. Lorenzo stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. "Doctor, Romano will be here within the hour. In the meantime, Lucia, help Miss Villanueva to her room." "I don't need a doctor," I protested weakly. "You don't get to make that decision." His voice was flat, brooking no argument. "You're under my protection, which means I'm responsible for your health. Whatever this is, we're going to find out." A Dr. Romano arrived 45 minutes later. A distinguished man in his 60s with the kind, tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much suffering. He examined me thoroughly in my room, Lorenzo standing by the window, his presence a constant pressure even though he said nothing. The doctor took blood samples, checked my vitals, palpated the swollen lymph nodes with expert fingers. When he was finished, he packed his medical bag with careful precision, then glanced at Lorenzo. "I'll need to run these tests at the lab, but given the symptoms, the swollen lymph nodes, the fever, the bone pain." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We should consider the possibility of a hematological disorder." "Speak plainly." Lorenzo's voice was cold. "Leukemia, potentially, but I won't speculate until we have the test results. I'll rush these through. We should have answers by tomorrow afternoon." After Dr. Romano left, silence filled the room. I lay in the massive bed, feeling small and exposed, while Lorenzo remained by the window, his back to me. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for a few weeks, before I came here." "And you said nothing?" Still he didn't turn around. "You let your father offer you as collateral when you knew you were sick." "I didn't know, not for certain. And what was I supposed to do? Tell you? So you could refuse the arrangement and destroy my father instead? He did turn then, and the look on his face made my breath catch. It wasn't anger exactly, but something more complex. Betrayal, perhaps, or calculation. Do you understand what this means, Isadora? If you have leukemia, if you're seriously ill, the arrangement your father proposed is void. Defective collateral. So you'll send me back? I forced myself to meet his eyes. Return the broken merchandise? Is that what you think I am? His voice was soft, dangerous. That I'd throw you out because you're sick? I don't know what you are. The fever was making me bold, stripping away the careful politeness I'd been maintaining. You took me as payment for a debt. You keep me here like a prisoner in a golden cage. You say it's protection, but it's still captivity. So yes, I think if I'm not useful to you anymore, you'll dispose of me, however is most convenient. Lorenzo moved then, crossing to the bed in 3 long strides. He sat on the edge, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that cedar and bergamot cologne that had become so familiar. Let me make something very clear. His voice was low, intense. If you have leukemia, if you're dying, that changes the arrangement, yes, but not in the way you think. You're under my protection now, Isadora. That means I'm responsible for you, for your health, your safety, your future. Why? The question escaped as barely a whisper. Why would you care? He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind those dark eyes. Because despite what you think, I'm not a monster. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because in the 8 days you've been here, you've impressed me. You're strong, intelligent, defiant, even when you're terrified. That's rare. I don't often encounter people who surprise me. So I'm interesting to you. That's why you'd help? Partly. He reached out, his fingers gentle as they brushed the swollen lymph node at my neck. And partly because letting you die would be a waste. If the tests confirm leukemia, we'll get you the best treatment available. Dr. Romano is excellent, but we have access to specialists at Milan, specialists who've treated this before and won. I can't afford that kind of care. You don't need to afford it. I'll cover all costs. Adding to my father's debt. No. He withdrew his hand. Consider it a separate arrangement. You need treatment? I can provide it. In return, you'll continue to fulfill your role here while you're able. When you're in treatment, we'll adjust accordingly. It was surreal, sitting in this opulent bedroom, discussing my potential death with a man who'd claimed me as property barely a week ago. And yet, beneath the transactional language, I sensed something else. An unexpected protectiveness, a determination that seemed to go beyond mere self-interest. Why? I asked again. Really why? Lorenzo stood, moving back to the window, putting distance between us. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer. Ovarian cancer that wasn't caught until it was too late. I watched her fade over 6 months, watched my father move heaven and earth trying to save her. He spent millions, called in every favor, flew in specialists from around the world. But it wasn't enough. He turned to face me, and I saw something vulnerable in his expression for the first time. I swore then that I would never be helpless like that again, that if I ever had the power to save someone, I would use it. So yes, Isadora, if you're sick, if you need treatment, I'll make sure you get the best available. Not because you're collateral or because of your father's debt, but because I can, because I won't watch another woman die when I have the resources to prevent it. The honesty in his words struck me like a physical blow. This was the man beneath the power, beneath the careful control. A son who'd lost his mother too young, who'd turned that loss into a driving need to never be powerless again. Thank you. I whispered. He nodded once, then moved toward the door. Get some rest. We'll have answers tomorrow. Lorenzo? I called his name before I could stop myself. He paused at the threshold, looking back. If it is leukemia, if I need treatment, I don't want to die. You won't. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I promise you, Isadora, whatever it takes, you won't die. Not on my watch. After he left, I lay in the darkness, processing everything that had been revealed. Lorenzo Cavallero, the man who'd claimed me as insurance, who operated in shadows and wielded power like a weapon, had just promised to save my life. Not because he had to, but because he'd chosen to. And somehow, I believed him. The test results came back on November 3rd at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dr. Romano delivered them personally, his expression grave as he sat across from me in the library where Lorenzo had insisted we meet. Lorenzo stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Dr. Romano said without preamble. Your white blood cell count is severely elevated, and your platelet count is dangerously low. Based on the progression of symptoms, I'd estimate you've had this for at least 2 months, possibly longer. The words settled over me like a shroud. I'd known, had suspected, but hearing the diagnosis spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. Treatment options? Lorenzo's voice was clipped, businesslike. Aggressive chemotherapy, starting immediately. The standard protocol is induction therapy to achieve remission, then consolidation and maintenance phases. We're looking at intensive treatment for several months, possibly a year or more depending on how she responds. Success rate? For someone Isadora's age, approximately 70% achieve remission with treatment, but we need to act quickly. Every day we delay, the cancer progresses. I found my voice. And without treatment? Doctor. Romano's expression was compassionate but honest. Without treatment, you have perhaps 3 to 6 months. With treatment and a bit of luck, you could live a normal lifespan. 3 to 6 months. The timeline echoed in my head, making the room spin slightly. We start immediately. Lorenzo's decision was instant, absolute. What do you need? Over the next hour, Dr. Romano outlined the treatment plan. Lorenzo listened with intense focus, asking sharp questions about protocols, side effects, success rates. He made calls, pulling strings I didn't fully understand, arranging for specialists to consult, for a treatment facility to be prepared. When Dr. Romano finally left, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. Lorenzo poured himself a whiskey, then offered me water, which I accepted with trembling hands. You don't have to do this, I said quietly. The treatment will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You could just let me go home. Let my father deal with it. Your father doesn't have the resources to save you. Lorenzo sat across from me, his eyes intense. And I meant what I said, Isadora. You're not dying. Not if I can prevent it. But why? I'm nothing to you. You're not nothing. His voice was firm. You're under my protection. That means something in my world. It means everything. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. A room on the estate's second floor was converted into a private treatment facility, equipped with everything Dr. Romano specified. Nurses were hired, specialists consulted. Lorenzo moved through it all with the same focused intensity he probably applied to his business dealings, treating my survival as a problem to be solved through sheer force of will and unlimited resources. On November 7th, I started my first round of chemotherapy. I'd read about the side effects, had tried to prepare myself mentally, but nothing could truly prepare you for the reality of having poison pumped into your veins. The nausea was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I was violently ill, my body rejecting the chemicals meant to save it. Lorenzo stayed. I hadn't expected that. I'd assumed he would delegate my care to the medical staff he'd hired, would check in occasionally but maintain his distance. Instead, he pulled a chair into my treatment room and sat there, working on his laptop, making calls in low tones, but always present. "You don't have to stay." I managed between bouts of nausea. This isn't pleasant to witness. Neither is watching someone fight for their life alone. He didn't look up from his screen. "Get used to my presence, Isadora. I'm not going anywhere." The first week of treatment was hell. My hair began falling out in clumps by day 5. The nurse who was helping me bathe discovered it first, her gentle hands pulling away strands that came loose at the slightest touch. I'd known it would happen, but the reality of seeing my dark hair littering the bathtub drain made something break inside me. I cried for the first time since arriving at the estate. Great, heaving sobs that racked my weakened body and left me gasping. And when Lorenzo found me afterward, curled in my bed with wet hair and tear-stained cheeks, he didn't say anything. He simply sat on the edge of the bed and let me cry against his shoulder, his hand stroking my back in slow, soothing circles. "It's just hair," he said finally. "It'll grow back." I know, but right now it feels like I'm losing everything. My freedom, my health, my hair. What's next? "Next you fight." His voice was firm. "And you win, because giving up isn't an option." By the end of the first week, I was too weak to leave my bed. The chemotherapy was destroying the cancer cells, but it was also destroying my healthy cells, leaving me vulnerable to every infection, every complication. Nurses monitored me around the clock, and Dr. Romano visited daily, adjusting medications, running tests, watching for signs of crisis. Lorenzo still came every evening. Sometimes he worked silently while I slept. Other times, he read aloud from books he found in the library, his deep voice a soothing presence in the darkness. And occasionally, when I was strong enough, we talked. "Tell me about your mother," I asked one night when the nausea had subsided enough to allow conversation. He was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "She was nothing like what you'd expect. Soft where my father was hard, gentle where he was ruthless. She tried to shield me from the reality of our family business for as long as she could." "Did it work?" "No. I was 12 when I figured out what my father really did. 13 when I watched him order a man's death over dinner. By 14, I understood that our world operated by different rules than the one she'd wanted me to believe in." "That must have been difficult." "It was necessary." His jaw tightened. "In my world, innocence is a liability. She tried to protect me from that truth, but she only delayed the inevitable. And when she got sick, everything changed. My father, who'd always been controlled, became desperate. He made mistakes, showed weakness. His enemies noticed. In the year after she died, we lost ground to rival families, lost business, lost respect. It taught me a valuable lesson." "What lesson?" He met my eyes, his expression hard. "That love is a weakness, that caring about someone gives your enemies a target, that the only way to maintain power is to never let anyone matter more than the empire." "And yet here you are," I pointed out, "spending thousands of dollars to save me. Doesn't that contradict your philosophy?" "Perhaps." He looked away. "Or perhaps I'm making a different kind of investment." "In what?" "In proving that I'm not my father, that I can save someone when it matters." His voice softened. "That I won't be helpless again." The vulnerability in his admission made my chest tighten. This wasn't just about me, I realized. This was Lorenzo fighting his own demons, his own past, through the vehicle of my treatment. "What if I don't survive?" I asked quietly. "What if, despite everything, the treatment doesn't work?" "Then I'll have tried." He looked back at me, his dark eyes intense. "And that has to be enough. But Isadora, you're going to survive. Because I won't accept any other outcome." The certainty in his voice was both comforting and terrifying. He was used to controlling outcomes, to bending the world to his will through force or money or influence. But cancer didn't care about power. It didn't negotiate or compromise. And if I died despite his efforts, despite his promises, what would that do to him? Over the next weeks, as November gave way to early December, I began to understand the full scope of what Lorenzo was doing for me. The specialists who flew in from Milan, London, even the United States, each consultation costing tens of thousands of dollars. The experimental drugs he approved without hesitation when Dr. Romano suggested them. The complete renovation of the treatment facility to include equipment found only in the most advanced hospitals. He was quite literally sparing no expense, moving mountains to save me. And with each passing day, each small improvement in my blood counts, each minor victory against the disease ravaging my body, I felt something shifting between us. This wasn't just a transaction anymore. This wasn't collateral or insurance or any of the clinical terms we'd used to describe our arrangement. This was Lorenzo Cavallero, revealing that beneath the calculated ruthlessness, beneath the power and control, existed a man capable of extraordinary devotion to someone he'd claimed to protect. And I was beginning to understand that I wasn't nothing to him. I was becoming everything. By mid-December, the first round of induction chemotherapy was complete, and we awaited the results that would tell us if remission had been achieved. I'd lost 20 pounds, all my hair, and more of my strength than I'd known I possessed. But I was alive. Against odds that had seemed insurmountable weeks ago, I was still breathing, still fighting. Dr. Romano arrived on December 18th with test results clutched in his hand, and an expression I couldn't quite read. Lorenzo and I sat together in the treatment room. My room now, really, since I'd spent more time here than anywhere else in the estate. "The blast count in your bone marrow has dropped to less than 5%, Dr. Romano announced, and I saw his lips curve into the first genuine smile I'd witnessed from him. "That means you've achieved remission." The words didn't feel real. Remission. The cancer wasn't gone, not completely, but it had been beaten back to the point where my body could begin recovering. "What's next?" Lorenzo asked, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently. "Consolidation therapy. Less intense than induction, but still rigorous. We continue treatment to eliminate any remaining cancer cells, prevent relapse. Then maintenance therapy, which can last up to 2 years. 2 years, I repeated, the timeline stretching before me like an endless road. 2 years of treatment, Dr. Romano clarified, but you'll regain strength during consolidation. You'll be able to resume more normal activities. The worst is behind you, Isadora." After he left, I sat in stunned silence, processing the information. Remission. I'd done it. We'd done it. "You're crying," Lorenzo observed, his thumb brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "Happy tears." I managed a weak smile. "I'm going to live." "I told you that you would." But there was something in his expression, a satisfaction that went beyond simple victory over disease. This mattered to him, I realized. My survival mattered to him in ways that transcended the original arrangement. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything. For the treatment. For staying. For not giving up on me. I don't give up on what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed me, but instead it sent warmth through my chest. "Is that what I am? Yours?" "Yes." No hesitation, no qualification. "You've been mine since the moment your father offered you as collateral. But now..." He paused, seeming to search for words. "Now it's different." "Different how?" "Now I'm choosing to keep you. Not because of debt or arrangement, but because I want to. The admission hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Lorenzo Cavallero, the man who'd claimed me as insurance, was saying he wanted me, not as property, but as... what exactly? Before I could formulate a response, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. I need to take this. He stood, stepping into the hallway. But even through the partially closed door, I could hear his voice rising, sharp with anger I'd never heard directed at me. What do you mean he's making moves against the Castellano territory? That violates our agreement. No, I don't care what he thinks my priorities have been. The business continues as always. Yes, I'm aware that I've been spending time away from the office. That doesn't change. He fell silent, listening to whoever was on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice was cold, dangerous. Tell Marcello that if he thinks my absence is an opportunity, he's gravely mistaken. I'll deal with this personally. Set up a meeting for tomorrow. He ended the call and returned to the room, but his expression had shifted. The gentle man who'd held my hand moments ago had been replaced by the dangerous crime lord who commanded an empire. Is everything all right? I asked, though clearly it wasn't. Business complications. He sat back down, but tension radiated from him. Nothing for you to worry about. Lorenzo, I heard you on the phone. Someone thinks you're weak because you've been here with me. Let them think what they want. His voice was hard. They'll learn otherwise soon enough. But if I'm causing problems for you, if my treatment is affecting your business... Stop. He cut me off. This is not your concern. My business, my enemies, my problems to handle. Your only job is to get better. But it was my concern, because I was the cause. For weeks, Lorenzo had been prioritizing my treatment over his empire, spending time at my bedside instead of intimidating rivals or managing his operations. And now, someone named Marcello was testing the boundaries, seeing if Lorenzo's focus elsewhere meant opportunity. Over the next days, I noticed changes. Lorenzo still visited daily, but his stays were shorter, interrupted by urgent calls and unexpected departures. The easy conversations we'd developed gave way to terse updates and distracted silences. I could see the weight of his dual responsibilities pressing on him, maintaining his empire while refusing to abandon my treatment. On December 23rd, Lucia brought dinner to my room with an expression that suggested she had news. Mr. Cavallero won't be joining you this evening, she said as she set up the tray. He's had to travel to Milan on urgent business. Milan? It was the first time Lorenzo had left the estate since my treatment began. There was an incident. Mr. Cavallero's presence was required to resolve it. An incident. Code. I was learning. For violence. For the enforcement of power through means I was probably better off not knowing. He was gone for 3 days. 3 days during which I progressed through the early stages of consolidation therapy, regaining strength slowly but steadily. 3 days during which I had too much time to think about what I was costing him, what my presence was demanding from a man who'd built his power on appearing invulnerable. When Lorenzo returned on the evening of December 26th, he looked exhausted. Not physically tired exactly, but worn in a way I'd never seen. He came directly to my room, bypassing his own quarters, and collapsed into the chair by my bed. "You're back," I said unnecessarily. "I'm back." He closed his eyes, his head resting against the chair back. Was it bad? In Milan? Bad enough. He opened his eyes, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Marcello thought my absence from daily operations meant weakness. He tried to move against one of our territories, take over distribution in the north. What happened? I made it very clear that my priorities haven't changed. that anyone who mistakes mercy for weakness will regret it. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. 3 of his men are in the hospital. He won't be making that mistake again. I absorbed this, understanding the violence implied but not stated. This was the reality of Lorenzo's world, the cost of the power he wielded. And by being here, by requiring his time and attention, I'd inadvertently created a vulnerability his enemies were trying to exploit. "You should go back," I said quietly. "To Milan, to your business. I'm in remission now. I don't need you here every day." "Is that what you think?" He sat up, his dark eyes intense. "That I'm only here out of obligation? I think you're trying to run an empire while babysitting a sick woman, and it's not sustainable." "Babysitting," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it?" He stood, crossing to the bed in 2 long strides. His hands framed my face, gentle despite the intensity in his expression. "I call it choosing you. Every day, every moment. I call it deciding that for the first time in my life, something matters more than power or territory or what my enemies think." His thumb traced my cheekbone, the gesture achingly tender. "You matter more, Isadora. Your life, your health, your future. That matters more than all of it." "Lorenzo." "No, let me finish." His voice was fierce. "You asked me once why I was doing this. I told you it was about not being helpless like when my mother died. And that was true, partly. But it's more than that now. You've become essential. The thought of losing you, of failing to save you, it's unbearable. So yes, I'm managing both my empire and your care. Yes, it's complicated and difficult, and causing problems I'll have to address. But I'm not walking away from you. Not now, not ever." The declaration should have frightened me. This was possession, claiming, the kind of obsessive devotion that in other circumstances might have felt suffocating. But from Lorenzo, after everything we'd been through, it felt like safety, like being cherished by someone who'd never allowed himself to cherish anything. "I'm falling in love with you," I admitted, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when you stayed through that first horrible week of treatment. Maybe when you held me while I cried about losing my hair. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about debt or arrangement or even gratitude. I'm falling in love with you, Lorenzo Cavallero, and I don't know what to do about it." He kissed me then, gentle despite the passion I could feel coiled beneath his control. It was our first kiss, achingly sweet and patient, a claiming that asked rather than demanded. When he pulled back, his eyes held something I'd never seen there before. Vulnerability, hope, and unmistakable love. "Then fall," he whispered against my lips. "And I'll catch you. Because I fell weeks ago, Mia Cara. The moment I realized I'd move heaven and earth to keep you alive. The moment I understood that saving you was saving myself. And in that moment, in that beautiful room that had witnessed so much pain and struggle, and now this overwhelming tenderness, I understood the truth. We'd both been saved. Not from debt or disease or enemies, but from the loneliness that had defined us both. Lorenzo had been alone in his power, isolated by fear and calculation. And I'd been alone in my illness, facing death without anyone who truly cared if I survived. But we weren't alone anymore. We had each other. And that, I was beginning to understand, was worth any cost, any danger, any complication that loving a man like Lorenzo Cavallero might bring. The consolidation therapy continued through January, and with it came a gradual return to life. My hair began growing back in soft dark fuzz. My strength returned in increments, and the hollow fear that had been my constant companion began to recede. Dr. Romano's reports grew increasingly optimistic with each passing week, each test showing my body reclaiming itself from the cancer that had tried to destroy it. But as I grew stronger, threats from Lorenzo's world grew more insistent. Marcello's challenge in Milan had been just the beginning. Word had spread that Lorenzo Cavallero, the untouchable prince of the Italian crime families, had a weakness. A woman. Not just any woman, but a sick woman who consumed his time and attention and resources. And in the ruthless calculus of their world, weakness was opportunity. On January 29th, everything came to a head. I was in the garden, my first time outside in weeks, bundled in warm clothing despite the winter chill, simply breathing fresh air and feeling sunlight on my face. Lorenzo was in his study handling business he'd put off too long. Lucia had accompanied me, standing a respectful distance away while I walked slowly along the gravel paths. I didn't hear them coming. Later, Lorenzo would tell me they'd disabled the perimeter security, breached the grounds with professional efficiency. All I knew was one moment I was admiring the winter roses, and the next, 3 men in dark clothing materialized around me. Miss Villanueva. One of them spoke with a heavy accent I couldn't place. Please come with us. We don't want to hurt you. Lucia stepped forward, her voice sharp. You need to leave immediately. Mr. Cavallero. One of the men grabbed her, a hand over her mouth, preventing her scream. The leader moved toward me, and instinct overrode my weakened state. I ran. I didn't get far. My body, still recovering from months of treatment, couldn't sustain the effort. I'd made it perhaps 20 yards before strong hands caught my arms, pulling me to a halt. I screamed then, loud and desperate, hoping someone would hear. Someone did. The explosion of violence happened so fast I could barely process it. One moment the men were dragging me toward the garden's back gate. The next Lorenzo was there, appearing like an avenging angel with Marco, and 2 other men behind him. What followed was brutal and efficient. Lorenzo moved with lethal precision, eliminating threats with the same focused intensity he'd applied to my treatment. Within 90 seconds, all 3 intruders were on the ground. One unconscious, one clutching a broken arm, one with blood streaming from his nose. Lorenzo came to me immediately, his hands gentle as they checked me for injuries, his voice low and urgent. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? I'm fine. I'm okay. But I was shaking, adrenaline flooding my system in a way that made the world tilt dangerously. He swept me into his arms, carrying me as though I weighed nothing, back toward the house while Marco and his men dealt with the intruders. In my treatment room, he set me down on the bed and immediately called Dr. Romano, despite my protests that I was physically unharmed. Your blood pressure is elevated, the doctor confirmed after examining me. But that's to be expected given the shock. Rest is what you need now, and no more outdoor excursions until Mr. Cavallero can ensure better security. After Dr. Romano left, Lorenzo paced the room like a caged predator, fury radiating from every line of his body. This is my fault, he said finally. I let my guard down. I got complacent because you were getting better, because I was happy, and they exploited it. Who were they? Marcello's men, trying to take you as leverage against me. His hands clenched into fists. They were going to use you to force my cooperation, probably torture you to prove they were serious. The casual way he said torture sent ice through my veins. This was the reality I'd been insulated from during my treatment. The violence, the ruthlessness, the complete disregard for human life that characterized Lorenzo's world. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now I end this. His voice was cold, absolute. I've been patient with Marcello, given him chances to back down peacefully. But coming after you crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. He's declared war, and I'm going to finish it. Lorenzo, please, don't do anything you'll regret because of me. Regret? He looked at me, his expression fierce. The only thing I'd regret is if they'd succeeded. If they'd taken you from me, hurt you, used you as a weapon against me. That I couldn't survive. Over the next 3 days, Lorenzo waged his war. He left the estate for hours at a time, returning exhausted and bloodied but alive. I didn't ask for details, didn't want to know the specifics of what he was doing. But I could see the toll it took, the weight of command, the burden of eliminating threats while trying to protect me. On February 1st, he returned with news. It's over. He collapsed into the chair by my bed, his face drawn with exhaustion. Marcello is finished. His operations are disbanded. His men scattered or dead. No one else will make the mistake of thinking you're an easy target. At what cost? I studied his face, seeing new lines of stress, new shadows in his eyes. A cost I'd pay 1,000 times over to keep you safe. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. But Isadora, I need to tell you something. After what happened, after nearly losing you to those men, I've made a decision. What kind of decision? I'm stepping back from active leadership of the family operations. Not abandoning them entirely, but installing trusted people in key positions, becoming more of an advisor than a commander. I stared at him, shocked. Lorenzo, you can't do that. This is your legacy, your empire. My empire nearly got you killed. His voice was firm, and I've realized something these past months. Power, territory, empire. None of it matters if I lose you. You matter more. Your life, your health, our future together. That matters more than all the rest combined. But what will you do? Focus on the legitimate businesses. The real estate holdings, the investments, the companies we've acquired. There's an entire empire there that doesn't require violence or constant vigilance. And it means I can be present. For you. For your continued treatment. For whatever life we build together. Tears welled in my eyes, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. Lorenzo Cavallero, who'd built his identity on power and control, was walking away from the throne for me. Are you sure? I whispered. More sure than I've ever been about anything. He moved to sit beside me on the bed, his arms gathering me close. You've given me something I never thought I'd have, Isadora. Hope. A reason to want more than power and fear. A future that doesn't end in violence or betrayal. I love you, and I choose you over everything else. I love you too. I pressed my face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my cheek. I choose you too. Then choose this. He pulled back slightly, reaching into his pocket. When he opened his hand, a ring glinted in the soft light, a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond. Marry me. Not because of debt or arrangement or any of the reasons that brought us together, but because I love you and I want to spend whatever time we have building a life together. Yes. The word came without hesitation, without doubt. Yes, I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, just like everything else he'd provided. Then he kissed me, and in that kiss was everything we'd survived, the fear, the pain, the desperate fight for my life, and his devotion that had never wavered. 3 months later, May 2025, the villa Lorenzo had found sat on the coast of Liguria, far from the machinations of his former empire. It was smaller than the estate, but perfect in its simplicity. White stone and terracotta tiles, gardens that spilled down toward the Mediterranean, and most importantly, complete privacy. I stood on the terrace, feeling the warm May breeze on my face, my hand unconsciously moving to touch the soft curls that had grown back darker and thicker than before. Dr. Romano's latest report had been clear. I remained in complete remission, the cancer undetectable, my body healing itself with each passing day. Lorenzo emerged from the house, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He'd changed too. No longer the sharp-suited crime lord, but a man in linen pants and a white shirt, his hair slightly tousled by the wind, his expression more relaxed than I'd ever seen it. "What are you thinking about?" He handed me a glass, though I'd only allowed to have small amounts given my continued maintenance therapy. "How strange life is." I leaned against him as his arm came around my waist. 6 months ago, I was dying. My father had sold me to pay his debts, and I was terrified of you. And now? Now I'm alive because of you. My father's debt has been forgiven. Lorenzo had done that too, wiping the slate clean as a wedding gift. And I'm married to the man I love more than anything. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "The estate, the wealth, the power?" "No." I turned to face him, cupping his face in my hands. "I don't miss any of it. This, right here, this is all I need. You, me, this simple life. It's perfect. Even knowing what I was, what I did. I know who you are, Lorenzo. All of you. The darkness and the light. And I love all of it. Because that darkness protected me when I needed it. That ruthlessness fought for my life when I was too weak to fight for myself. You're not just one thing. You're everything. And you're mine. Always yours." He kissed me gently. "Mia cara, my life, my heart, my salvation." We stood there as the sun set over the Mediterranean. Two people who'd been brought together by debt and desperation, who'd survived disease and violence and the dangers of a world most people never glimpsed. We'd paid our costs in pain and fear and transformation, but we'd won. Against all odds, against cancer and enemies, and the darkness that had defined Lorenzo's life, we'd won. And the prize was this: simple peace, quiet love, and the promise of tomorrow. Lorenzo had abandoned his throne for me, and I'd fought back from death for him. Together, we'd found something neither of us had thought possible: redemption, healing, and a love strong enough to rewrite both our stories. The girl who'd been delivered as collateral was gone. The crime lord who'd never allowed himself weakness had disappeared. In their place stood two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest power isn't control or empire. Sometimes the greatest power is choosing love, even when it costs you everything else, especially then.